So the video that we just watched ties into my topic, which is competence to make treatment decisions. Another way I like looking at it is a way of balancing rights, responsibility, and risk. A few things that I'll be covering is like the diagnosis, what the impact comes after it, why legal intervention is necessary, the factors that influence a decision behind finding treatment, and then the historical point of view on where it came from, and then certain advances in the mental health rights and policies, the impact of communication on treatment compliance, how to test for it, and then there are a few references on the last slide. Okay, so the diagnosed phase. Schizophrenia, such as what Paul had in the video, is a mental disorder that's characterized by disruptions in thought processes, perceptions, emotional responsiveness, and social interactions. So when you look at the impact of being diagnosed with something like that, Paul definitely had a psychological issue. And from that aspect, he had issues with memory and making decisions. He wasn't able to answer any of the questions that law enforcement nor the nurses were asking him. And then you have the social part. This didn't pertain to Paul, but it has been reported for some people to be belligerent with their family members. They're not able to connect with other people. And then some of them have a run-in with the law enforcement. And there are a lot of cases like that, whether they end up sitting in jail or in Paul's case, they end up getting dropped off in the middle of nowhere. Okay, so why is legal intervention necessary for things like that? You definitely have to, before you even start looking at the legal process, you have to ask yourself, can they help themselves? In that situation, Paul could not help himself. There are individuals, they either can manage or they may lack the capability of recognizing the need for treatment. In Paul's situation, in that moment, he was not able to recognize that he needed help. He couldn't even speak for himself. And then you look at when it is a hard time to decide how to balance their privacy and when the government should step in. And then when the government does step in, it definitely has to apply to either two of the different factors. They either have to show a lack of competence or they are a harm to themselves or to others. So those are the things that you should look at. In Paul's situation, it would be if he was alive and then his parents took the case to court. Those are the things that we would have to cover. And so how do you decide? You have to keep the key ideas in mind. What the history looks like, what did the health professionals do in the middle of that situation, and what was the aftermath of it all. And then you also look at the level of how important the situation is different for everyone. What a big decision, such as Paul needing help, his parents said he needed help. From the time they put the ammonia cap in his nose, that's when they should have known. To them, that was a big decision to take him to the hospital, but to the nurses and to the cops, it was a small decision. They just wanted him to be relocated somewhere else. And then where does this kind of start from? It started from one of the cases, Cruson versus Missouri Department of Health. There was a young lady, she was 26 years old. Her name was Nancy Cruson. She was in a vegetative state, and her parents and friends, they wanted to take her off of the life support machine, but there was not enough evidence to say that's what Nancy would want for herself. There were no journals, there were no recordings, there were no videos of such. She didn't even have a will in place, and so eventually this led to the court saying, "Hey, the wills that you have, it needs to be clear and concise, and it should definitely state what that person will want in case of situations such as Nancy being in a vegetative state." Okay, so when you look at when you start going through the legal process, there are certain things that you can go through. Let's say, let's go back to Paul. If he was living, guardianship is an option. It's a legal mechanism by which the state delegates authority over an individual's person or estate to another party. There are subcategories of guardianship. The first one is general. It's where the guardian has complete control over everything, over the person's health and their assets, which could be money, property, anything like that. And then you have specific, which is also known as limited. control over specific areas, which is broken down into it's either or. You have a limited guardianship over just their health and nothing else, or it can be you have guardianship of the estate, which let's say the specific amount is $250,000. That is the only thing that they have a say-so over. Now, when it comes to their health, they have no say-so in that. And then you have the last one, conservatorship, is the decisions that need to be made with either their health or their assets is one or the other. Okay, so what has changed since the Nancy's case? They have came up with a way for it to be least restrictive. An example would be living in an assisted living facility that allows the person to have a bit of freedom. Let's say for someone like Paul, there were days that he was good. He didn't show any signs of a mental disorder. Then there were days where he would have a psychotic breakdown. And so that could possibly be an option for him where he can still live his life, be a young adult, but he also has someone to supervise him other than his parents. Then you have a restricted emergency, which is a hearing that's now required before giving full control. You have to have something like that in place because there are some people that would take advantage of someone's money, or they will say something about their health that's probably not what the person would want. And then so the courts definitely encourage a guardian to attend the hearing so they may put their 2 cents into it. So when you have effective communication with the individuals with the mental illness, how do you go about that? You definitely have to go into receiving an informed consent. And what you have to keep in mind when getting that informed consent is that person can make their own decisions in certain cases, which is called individual autonomy. And then you have a rational decision making. That person should have all the facts first before even making a decision. And so safety should definitely be a priority. So let's say Paul was living and he would have to make a decision on, what needs to happen next. Does he agree to go into an assisted living facility, or does he want to stay home with his parents under supervision? He would have to have all the facts up front before a decision can be made. And then when informed consent is thrown out the window, it's only due to these exceptions: in emergencies, patient waiver, therapeutic privilege, and if the person is just flat out incompetent. And so how do you test for competence? If you sit down with that person that has that mental disorder, you can test by assuming the person knows all of their options, but it can be difficult for them to maneuver their thoughts with a high level of reasoning, which is called cognitive process. And then you have irrational decision, where if they have a mental disorder episode like Paul did, he probably would have made irrational decisions, so you have to look at that as well. And then there's reasonable outcome test, which is comparing their decision to a reasonable person, which can produce biases. And then you have the expression of preference versus the reasonable outcome. It's just one that is in preference of that person that is experiencing mental disorder. And then there's the other side of it where it's not in the preference of what that person may want for themselves. Okay, so in competence and treatment decisions, it should always be presumed that that adult can decide what their treatment should be. The only time that their competence will be in question is if they're refusing treatment, or as if they have seek consultation from a medical professional and the statements are just too confusing and the treatment is just way too risky, or if that person is incompetent. Okay, so what we have went over today has been just understanding the diagnosis. In this case, it was schizophrenia and the impact that it has on everyone around them, and then understanding why legal intervention is necessary, the factors that influence making a decision for treatment, where does it come from as far as history-wise, the risk and benefits of forced treatment versus voluntary treatment, how did the courts advance as far as mental health rights and policies, the impact of communication on treatment compliance, how to test for that person's competence, and then the last slide will definitely be my references. So if you have any questions, please leave them below in the peer review, and thank you for watching.